Hi, I'm Tori Hageman. If you followed me on YouTube much, you know by now that one of my most favorite things to paint is a big sky with sweeping clouds. You may not know one of the biggest things that I struggle with as an artist is that my natural painting style, the natural bent that I have, tends to be very, very tight. But I love loose impressionistic work. So this is something that I have struggled with for years. I'm still pushing through it. I haven't arrived yet. But I have spent a lot of time experimenting with different painting techniques. I watch a lot of videos. I try different brushes, trying to come up with some techniques that will guarantee me to have a loose impressionistic painterly style. And I think I'm gaining on it. This painting was actually done as a course for Skillshare that's just gone live. But in this free YouTube video, I'd love to show you some highlights from that course, some of the things that helped me get the clouds in the right perspective, how I used a single brush to do this entire painting, clouds and the landscape, how I worked through this problem of getting the dark to light sky without having to get that so smooth. I've got a good workaround for that. And it was just a lot of fun. The landscape in my original painting was very traditional, didn't like it, repainted it, and ended up putting blocks of color in it. Gave it a nice, clean, contemporary look. I'd never painted anything quite like that. I was super pleased with that, and hope you'll come along. I think you'll pick up a few good pointers and tips. Thing that I like to do, particularly with large sky paintings, is to make sure that I'm getting the clouds laid in at the right angle, which results in the correct perspective. In the course, I go into more detail on how to look at your photo to figure out where those lines are. But for you, I'm going to have another video that I did called How to Avoid One of the Biggest Mistakes, where I'll go into greater detail on how to do this. If you'll watch this video until the end, you'll see that video pop up and you can follow that process more closely. I often like to paint on a white canvas and start with the blue sky first, but in this painting, I purposefully wanted to put the clouds in first, so I needed a color background. It's hard to paint white clouds on a white canvas. For this purpose, I used Naples yellow, which produced a lovely glow showing through. I also used a very limited palette in this painting, which will guarantee great color harmony. The clouds were made using my favorite gray, which is a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt umber with white, and I made a number of different values. The sky itself was used, I used ultramarine blue and white in varying degrees of white. So again, the color harmony in this painting was just great. I start by laying in my darkest values. I'm being very mindful of where my angular lines are, and I'm looking at my reference photo, and I'm starting with the biggest clouds first. I'm putting the darkest values in the center of the cloud. That's not always how a cloud will be. Sometimes you'll see darker near the edges, but that's how I'm doing these. And I'm just kind of building those clouds out, being mindful of the angle that I'm on. I did not use a slow dry medium in these clouds, but I would go back and just dampen my brush, and I was able to get a soft transition. I'm a big believer in using lots and lots of layers. If you're painting flowers or skies or sidewalks, I don't like just having one solid color. I think the more layers that you put in, the more depth it's going to have, the more painterly and more interesting it's going to look. So with these clouds, I went back over them multiple times, just layer upon layer, and they just became more and more beautiful and more soft. As I got lower on my angles, the clouds became smaller and a little flatter. That's not always the case. Sometimes with cumulus clouds, they can be very voluminous at the horizon, but typically they get smaller and flatter as they go down. When I was ready to put in the sky, I used my darkest value of the ultramarine blue and white. It wasn't pure ultramarine blue. You could do that, but I felt that would be a little too dark. And I'm using this same flat chiseled brush that I use for the clouds. And one thing that I love about using that type of brush is you can then go and actually carve into those clouds. Sometimes when we're doing clouds, they can get a little too round and fluffy and cotton ball looking. But this is a way to go back in with this sharp edge and just cut in. And here, instead of worrying about getting in a smooth transition, I'm just taking my brush, and as I drop down to the next value, I am then doing sort of a crisscross motion where the lighter blue hits the darker blue. And you can pull the dark blue down into the light, you can pull the light up into the dark. And I just wasn't worried about getting that super smooth. And it ended up, I'm not trying to get rid of all the brushworks. I love seeing the brushwork. It just looks more painterly to me. So I'll probably always do it this way. I used to always paint where I would put the sky in first, struggle getting in that smooth transition, and put the clouds on top. But I love this method so much better. I love being able to chisel into the clouds and get some really neat, interesting shapes using the putting in the background second. I just loved it. I may be hooked on this. One of the things that I find really helpful with painting clouds is to continually turn my brush. I'll use the corner, I'll use the flat side, so I'm not getting the same stroke over and over. I'm also using different amounts of pressure. So I'm getting places of the cloud that look a little thicker and denser, and then I'll have just a tiny bit of paint on my brush and sort of press the brush out and get those what I call little wispy break off pieces that are so important. One thing that was I thought really interesting with these, because I had put all the big clouds in on yellow, but later clouds, after I'd painted in the blue, I started adding a few extra clouds, and look at the difference in putting that cloud on top of the blue. It really lost that warmth and glow. So I started adding in, I just had to kind of manufacture a glow and add it back into the clouds because it was looking so different. I love these places where the clouds are thin and wispy and things are connected and they're not just free floating out there. I think that's what really makes one of the things that can really make a sky painting read as something believable or not, and stagnant or moving. And so I will put just a small amount of paint on my brush. My brush is usually damp, and I'll just lightly scrub into that canvas, letting the tooth of the canvas pull some paint off and leaving these thin, wispy places. I just love that technique and think it looks very believable. As I mentioned in the intro, I painted over the original landscape that I had put in this. It was very traditional. I didn't like it. And for many years, if I didn't like something, I would just mess with it and mess with it and try tweaking it. And a lot of times it just never got noticeably better. And I'd end up putting that painting in the graveyard pile. But I've just gotten to the point, if I don't like something, I will tweak it a little bit. But if it's not working, I just paint it out and start over. And those are the paintings that typically turn out the best for me. And I do it in almost every painting that I do. There's something that I either don't like or I think it could be a lot better. I just paint it out, give myself a clean slate, and do something different. And in this painting, I ended up putting in blocks of color to form the landscape. I'd never painted anything quite like it. I used the same colors I'd used in the rest of the painting, including the Naples yellow from the underpainting and including the blue. I used that in the foreground as well. And it gave this real contemporary look to the painting. I just loved it. I think I'm going to be doing that again as well. At the link in the description box below, you can check out the full teaching on this painting along with other courses that I have and hundreds of other art and craft teachers. It's like a great buffet for learning. I encourage you to check out all the resources Skillshare has available.